Okay, tonight we're tying the copper body minnow nymph. Now we're using a nymph hook, and what I'm using right now is from Umpqua. Whoops. Okay, here we go. I'm using Umpqua U series, and it's a U104, which is a direct equivalent of the Temco 5263. It's a 3X long heavy hook. It's a nymph hook. We're using sulky copper foil thread. We're using ultra wire copper medium. You can also use brassy on this one. This is the fly that we're going to tie. Now I'm also using Unithread 6.0. There we go. I'm using pheasant tail fibers. I'm using a saddle hackle, and I'm using way down at the base of these feathers to get what I need out of them. So this one, I've already taken a few out of it. We're going to take a few more, but that's where we're taking from, is the very base. None of the fuzz. And we're using peacock herl. We're using about 6 strands of peacock herl. All right, we've got a hook and the vise. We're going to begin with our thread, and we're going to wrap the thread down toward the base. But once we get started here a little bit, we're going to trim off the tail. We're going to take a piece of the foil, the sulky foil, and a short piece of the copper wire. Put them together. You can see the two together right there. And we're going to start about right in here. We want to keep both of them near the top of the hook all the way down. And we want a real smooth body for the foil, so we don't want to get too wild with spacing in our thread. When we get down to about that far, then we're going to choose quite a chunk of tailing material. You can see how much I took there off that feather. Pinch it down, and we're going to tie it out about half the body length into a tail. Now we're going to lift the foil and the copper wire together, if we can get it together. There we go. Now we're going to wrap the tail down just a little bit past that. That foil really gets in the way, but try to keep it controlled. We want that tail fibers up on top of the hook again. There, nice tail. Now, once we've got the tail in there on top of the hook, now we can wrap a little bit more right down to the beginning of that bend. The copper wire and the foil on top. Then keeping a nice smooth thread base all the way back toward the eye of the hook. The smoother you can keep your thread base, the better your foil body is going to look. When we get down near the front, then we're going to put a 1/2 inch in here just to keep the thread from unraveling. You can see how that tail looks there. We might have to trim it just a touch. Now we're going to take the sulky copper, and we're going to begin wrapping that up the body. The nice thing about the foil, copper foil, is it's flat. So if you happen to miss a wrap, you can always go back over it without causing a problem. But again, try to keep it as smooth. As we can, and we're going to go all the way up to just behind the eye of the hook. Now, I've worked with wider foils before, but I really like the sulky. You can actually wrap the sulky onto an empty thread spool and run it through a bobbin if you want to, as long as you mind the twist. But it's also the brightest foil I've ever worked with. And it's strong. You can break it, but it takes a bit. It's stronger than your thread is. Now watch me break it. Okay, now we can tie that off. And trim that off. We're through with that. Now we're going to take our wire and we can wrap it the same direction or counter wrap it. I'm going to wrap this one a counter wrap. And we're just going to spiral it because this is the ribbing. Spiral it down that shaft. We get up to here. We can tie that down. 3 or 4 thread wraps, and then we can spiral that, or what they call helicopter it off. And there we've got a nice flashy body, nice ribbing. Now we're going to take another bunch of that saddle hackle, larger this time, for the throat of this fly. So you can see about how much I have. It's going to go stretch just a little over halfway back. There we go. And we're going to take about a dozen to 15. As you can see on this pheasant tail feather, you have 2 different sides. You have the heavily marked side with the red tips. And then you have the other side. It's a lot flimsier, but it's also a lot more gluey. It's really hard to get to separate out fibers with this stuff down here. You want this up here, because this separates out into individual fibers quite nicely. And we're going to take quite a few of them. So we've got quite a few fibers in there. And we want this to stretch back to the end of the tail or just a little bit farther. I'm going to take this one back just a little bit farther. Tie it down. Keep the fibers above the hook surface. Trim off the waist. Make a nice smooth surface down to the eye. Back up. Now we're going to get our peacock. I was wondering what happened to it. It fell on the floor. All right, again, we've got our peacock fibers and our electrical clip. We're going to trip off the ends so you don't get too involved in this. We're going to tie in the end of these fibers. Then we're going to twist the probe, the fibers together, make a nice collar. Make sure these stay twisted as you wrap them down the hook. And when we get back to about that point, then we're going to tie them off just behind the eye. Trim those off, and now we can whip finish. Trim, and we're done. Got a nice copper body minnow.